This podcast is brought to you by the North Dakota Petroleum Foundation. From heating our homes and powering our vehicles to cell phones, clothing, and medical equipment, oil and natural gas makes everyday life better. North Dakota Oil and Natural Gas, advancing the possibilities. Learn more at ndpetroleumfoundation.org. Welcome to Plain Talk Live. I'm your host, Rob Port. Congress just voted on an infrastructure bill, a very large infrastructure bill. It's a $715 billion infrastructure bill, which at this point, can we just admit the money, I hear that the cost of what Congress is spending, and my eyes just start to glaze over because there's so many big numbers. I don't even know how you comprehend some of these numbers. Anyway, it was a narrow vote, 221 to 201. Two Republicans voting with Democrats in favor of the bill, but the rest of the Republican Congress, caucus remained united in opposition. So we're going to talk about that with Congressman Kelly Armstrong. We're also going to talk about Coal Creek Station, which is a big deal. Got a new buyer. It's going to continue to operate, but there's some moving parts here, specifically in terms of carbon capture. Their plan for the way they're going to operate it is dependent on carbon capture, which obviously has its the government, our state government, our federal government is trying to do a lot of things to push that technology along. So we're going to be talking about that. But anyway, without any more delay, let's bring on my guest, Congressman Kelly Armstrong. And maybe first I should talk, Kelly, about what you think about the sticky stuff thing in baseball, right? Since that's obviously the most pressing and important issue of the day.
I think it's terrible. I think we don't need mall cops. We need umpires. We don't need rules like that. You want to do this? It's bad for the game. It's bad for watching. It's a bad look when you have star talented pitchers getting ticked off and they're disrobing themselves on the field. Right? Max Scherzer absolutely lost it. We should be talking about Ohtani because what he's doing right now is like
unbelievable.
Unheard of. And instead we're talking again. It's just like everything else, right? Why aren't we celebrating the really cool stuff? Because we can't get out of our own way and we cause bad problems.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I listen. I think Major League Baseball should have a rule about sticky stuff, and then we ought to enforce that rule. I mean, it's much like with the immigration mess. We have a problem where we have laws and we have rules, and then we don't enforce them, and then we create a quagmire. And we have selective enforcement, and it gets weird. So anyway, now that baseball's out of the way, why'd you vote against the infrastructure bill?
Because it's terrible. There's good things in it. I mean, when you're building roads, doing all of those things, that's great. But we've had 13 hearings in Energy and Commerce on the Clean Futures Act, and the Clean Futures Act is nothing to keep our economy clean, but it will decimate North Dakota's way of life. That's just the truth. Way too many of those provisions are in it. This is the first bill with earmarks in it, and you can tell. And it's just going that. But I want to go back to something you said at the beginning on comprehending the amount of money. This is always difficult, right? It's like people don't understand what $1 trillion is. And I don't mean that as a criticism to anybody. Like it's hard for me to get my head around it. I'm sure it's hard for you to get your head around it. So a very good friend of mine in North Dakota gave me an idea. And 1 million seconds is like 11 days. 1 billion seconds is 31.7 years. 1 trillion seconds is 31,700 years. There were saber-toothed tigers and woolly mammoths running around 1 trillion seconds ago. And we are sending that amount of money out the door, it seems like every 6 weeks out here. And that is unsustainable. It is going to be it's the biggest long-term threat this country faces. And to be honest, it's a short-term threat if you see what's going on with inflation. And listen, we've dodged inflation for 20 years in a lot of different ways. And I think there's a lot of people that have reasons why, but I think the real answer is nobody really knows why we've dodged it for 20 years. But I don't think we're dodging it this time. And it's coming, and you can see it in gas prices. You can see it in food prices. And the problem with that for a state like North Dakota, I mean, our oil is at about 75 today, but our producers aren't seeing that increase. It's all going somewhere else. And whether it's middlemen and transportation or just the natural course of consumer price index and inflation, this is a real problem, not just for us in North Dakota, but all across the country.
What frustrates me, and you're absolutely right about the money that we're spending, that we're spending It seems like we don't even talk about the money that the spending in terms of what the federal government is actually taking in revenue. We're spending $1 trillion here, $1 trillion there, and then at some point we take in some revenue and then we run a budget deficit, and who cares? We're just putting it all on the credit card, and who cares about it? And that's frustrating in and of itself, but it's become such a rote discussion. It's like, yeah, budget deficits, whatever. Let's move on to what we're spending. What's frustrating to me is that this country really does need to invest in infrastructure. There are pressing, legitimate infrastructure issues: roads, bridges, trains, pipelines, all sorts of things. And some of those are private sector things that just need maybe more government facilitation than spending. But you know what I mean.
Less government regulation?
Yeah, that's a good point. So, I mean, to me, it's like, I want to talk about that stuff. We need our infrastructure for moving goods and services around the country. Think of how dependent we all are. We just came through the pandemic. Everybody's ordering stuff online. That's great as far as it goes. But how do those goods get to us? I mean, what happens if we, something terrible happens and we're all leaning on that infrastructure again, and all of a sudden it's not working? Our power infrastructure is not up to snuff, right? Where we have problems, and yet in Washington, D.C., we've redefined infrastructure to mean a whole bunch of other things that I don't want to necessarily say are not unimportant, but they're not infrastructure. So we have an infrastructure bill that, what percentage of this bill do you think is actually about infrastructure?
Not enough. It should be 100%, right? It actually should be. But even the stuff that you could generously qualify as infrastructure, electric charging stations, the types of things that actually, as we do this, you and I both know, there's going to be more electric cars in 5 years in the United States than there are now, whether government gets involved or not. People are demanding them. But even those things are just deployed out in a way that is not realistic to how things work. And more importantly, we don't prioritize exactly what you said. Things that are old, things that are good, things that we need, that we already know we need, that need updating, need modernization. The grid is a perfect example. Listen, I don't care how you are producing electrons to go on the grid. We know our grid infrastructure needs more resiliency, and it needs more updating from a cybersecurity standpoint to high transmission lines to all of those different issues. We need to do that. And instead, we're concentrating on electrifying the USDA fleet or whatever environmental thing that's going to help win an election somewhere.
Do you think that's it? Because infrastructure is kind of boring, right? Just in terms of sort of our entertainment reality television approach to politics, infrastructure is a boring thing. It's not sexy. It's not something a lot of people get wrapped around there. And maybe it's boring because most people, I think if you bring it down, well, should we fix the roads? Just about everybody's going to agree with that. It's boring. What's not boring, do you think that's it? Like, it's just, we're not going to just pass an infrastructure bill because that's super boring. That's not going to rile people up on Facebook. I worry that a lot of the things government does is because we're trying to serve an audience, not trying to serve constituents.
Well, the new word's transformative. That's the new word. And you're hearing it from everybody on the other side of the aisle, whether it's executive branch agencies, chairman of committees, all of that. The new word is transformative. And I think that goes to what you say. Transformative doesn't sound like a boring word. It's a nothing word. It is a word that makes you sound all of these different things. A buddy of mine, this is going to be weird, but my best friend since kindergarten, retweeted a tweet the other day about, he's a principal of a school in Western Montana. And I don't know where this guy was the principal that he retweeted, but he said, hey, listen, we're not inventing some new 21st century program. We're just going to do everything we did last year a little bit better. And I just, for some reason, I love that tweet. I'm like, listen, I got an education. My government teacher in high school just brought another close-up class out last week. He was my wrestling coach. He was my AP government teacher in high school. He has more to do outside of my family. He has more to do with the person I am than any other adult in my life. And for some reason, that tweet made me think of him. How about we just do things a little better?
Yeah.
Instead of talking about all these other programs that, listen, the amount of faith my colleagues on the other side of the aisle put in government is astounding to me. And that comes from an entire adult life of understanding that government almost never does anything well.
What? I wrote a column a couple of weeks ago, and I think the headline was like, just plow the damn roads, right? Stop trying to entertain me. Just plow the roads. Like I will watch Brad Pitt and all the celebrities and everybody. I'll watch them for entertainment. You guys plow the damn roads. That's all I want. Right? I don't need you to implement my culture or anything like that. I just need you to fix the roads, balance the budget. This is all I want.
You know, there is some hope, I think, provided they can get the circus that is the New York mayor's race election figured out. But the guy who won is actually a former law enforcement officer in the city of New York. It's the biggest city in the world, the most important city in the world, whether people agree with or like that or not. And nobody running to be the mayor of the city cares about taking out the garbage or getting the roads fixed. Yeah. They're talking about everything but the things you need to do to make New York function as a city. But at least, hopefully, if everything works out, listen, the Democratic primary is going to be the election for mayor of New York City. But at least the guy leading now is the closest thing to a municipal type of leader that they have seen in that place in a very long time.
Yeah. Well, by the way, what a ringing endorsement for ranked choice voting, by the way, which was going to be on the ballot here in North Dakota, but for the fact that the state Supreme Court kept it off because they had some problems with the way they went about their business. Let's talk Coal Creek Station. Good news.
Yes.
We knew this news was coming for a while. We knew there was a deal in place. I guess we finally got to the point where it could all be divulged publicly. New organization is new companies taking over their and their plan on how they're going to make it work is interesting to me because they want to carbon capture is a key part of it. And they want to use part of Coal Creek's output. And this is interesting because it has implications for renewables too. They want to use part of Coal Creek's power output to power the carbon capture effort for Coal Creek Station. So they're going to use some of the power plant's own energy to capture carbon. That's going to free up space on that very, very valuable transmission line, which goes across North Dakota into the Minnesota market, opens up some capacity there for some renewables, which are very much in the demand of the Minnesota market. This seems like a win, unless you're some hardcore ideologue. This seems like a win all the way around, except it's very dependent on carbon capture. Is that what you're seeing?
Well, yeah. I mean, we'll have to see it. First of all, let's talk about the human side of this. I don't think it's hyperbole to say without that station there are 12, 13 communities in central North Dakota that are just essentially are not the same 5 years from now.
Yeah.
So this is a tremendous win for Washburn, Beulah, Hazen, Underwood,
Central North Dakota.
I mean, this is just fantastic. Secondly, it's being purchased by a Bismarck, North Dakota company. These guys have been here. I've known them all my life. Stacy Chider is I consider him a friend. Ryan Kopsing is my best friend from college, and they probably know more about energy markets than any other company.
I think they've been operating for what, like almost 30 years.
Yeah, and so we didn't look outside of the state or anywhere else to come save us. We had a really good business company and a North Dakota business that's willing to take the risk, and I think that is just a cool little cherry on the top of all of this. And for me personally, they're all friends of mine, and I like at a very personal level, I just texted them and said, thank you. I'm not sure. I know you all are doing this for business reasons, but you really did save a big chunk of central North Dakota. Yeah. Now, the second part on the carbon capture, which I think is important. And I think the good news is North Dakota is one of two states with primacy. Second good news is we have had Secretary Granholm speak to carbon capture as part of infrastructure moving forward. Bad news is Gina McCarthy and two other cabinet agency branches came out essentially saying you don't spend $1 on promoting one molecule of carbon 1 second longer than you absolutely have to. And so we obviously have Project Tundra. You know, the Red Trail Energy is doing a carbon capture project with the ethanol plant in Richardson. This is a part of the path moving forward. The concern is always this, that there are just simply too many on the environmental left that don't want realistic solutions and economic solutions. Their version of all of the above means only wind and only solar and everywhere. And so that is the fight we're having to have to continue. We're going to have to make sure agencies are putting programs in place that allow private industry to compete in this space. R&D, 45Q. I mean, we can get really wonky on all of this stuff, but I think the real point is we need to make sure that the voices that are sounding the most reasonable, and I use that loosely in this administration, are amplified and the crazy talk is diminished.
Well, I agree with that, and I want to get into, because you're part of an endeavor, the new climate caucus, and I want you to talk about that here in a moment. But one thing that I want to make very clear is a lot of people have been, I think people have taken a more critical tone of this transaction with Coal Creek Station, where they're making it sound like it's being bailed out, like somebody came in and rescued coal. And to a certain point, that's accurate. Great River Energy was going to close it. Another company came in and with a plan, and they're going to buy it. But something you said I think is very important. This was a business decision. This makes business sense. We are developing a technology that will allow Coal Creek Station to operate not only profitably, but also operate in the context of modern understandings about climate science. We can do this. And I think that's what this is proving. And it's not some bailout. This is an opportunity. And I think people are missing the boat on that, because we can capture this carbon. We can continue to use this resource. And by the way, use coal to power electric vehicles, which I'm kind of excited about. I think I'm not ready for one yet. I'm not sure they're quite practical for the climate that we live in here in North Dakota yet, but one day I think they will be, and I look forward to owning one day, because I think they're cool. And one really good way to power all those electric cars would be coal power, right? Why not?
Well, absolutely. And I think, let's talk about the consumer understanding of climate right now. I mean, regardless of the science, first of all, that part of being on this conservative climate conference is recognizing, one, that we have a lot of companies, whether you're in the oil industry, whether you're in the natural gas industry, whether you're in the coal industry, whether you're in the cattle industry, or whether you're in the agriculture industry. We have a lot of companies and a lot of people in North Dakota already doing a really pretty good job of protecting the air, protecting the water, continuing to innovate, right? And one of the reasons for that is, farmers need to make money on the same quarter of section every year. They need to take care of their land. Ranchers need to feed and water their cows every year. They need to have those sources. In the oil and gas industry, consumers on the world stage are demanding cleaner energy. That is, regardless of where you personally fall on this, these companies are in the business to produce things and make money. And in order to do that, they have to give consumers what they want. So our plan is to allow private industry, technology neutral R&D, take the science where the science takes us, not where we're trying to drive it for political and ideological reasons, and also recognize, we had the methane CRA last week, and I think the biggest misconception on this is they think if the EPA doesn't regulate it, it's the Wild West. It's not. We have the Department of Environmental Quality in North Dakota. We have the Industrial Commission. We have the state legislature, and we have the executive branch. And all the people producing the things we need to feed and fuel our cars and our kitchen tables live in these communities. Their kids go to school here. They recreate here. They hunt, they fish, they go tubing, they go on lakes. They're not going to live in some super fun site, and the companies don't want to do that either. The difference between federal regulation and state regulation is state regulation can adapt. And federal regulation doesn't just tell you where you have to go, they tell you how you have to get there. And that is simply not the way to innovate and move forward towards the things we need to have happen.
So tell me about this new climate caucus, because I think that's an interesting thing, and people are hearing that like what in the world? Why are a bunch of Republicans on this? And I think that's an unfortunate reaction to the way we've debated climate change, which is so far, and I don't think this is a fair characterization, but this is a lot of the way people see it, is on one hand, you've had people who just deny, human beings are not having an impact. It's all a bunch of nonsense or whatever. And then the people on the other side who think the world is ending and we've got to use the tax code to tax everybody into compliance with some new regime that is completely crazy. And the only sorts of energy we can use are solar and wind and everything else. I think what you're saying is we got to cut some of that crazy out. The climate caucus, I think, that's Republicans engaging, my perception of it anyway, is that it's Republicans engaging on this issue in a new way that says this isn't about climate denialism or anything like that. This is about a recognition that we can produce energy. We can improve our existing forms of energy and continue to use them and continue to have them bring us prosperity while, again, recognizing that we do want to do something about emissions. That to me is a revelation. That's a good thing.
It is a good thing, and the reason, listen, I'll go purely political on this, and this is important because you have to be able, in order to effectuate policy, you have to win an election. That's essentially how it works. And if you are under the age of 30, it doesn't matter what party you belong to, and it doesn't matter where you live in the country. 85% of people under the age of 30 rate climate change as a 1, 2, or 3 issue, and they rate it with high intensity. That means they care about it and they vote on it. And our answer cannot be sitting it out and only saying no. It's easy to say no right now, Rob, because the programs that the Democrats are pushing, particularly in energy and commerce in the House, don't work. The technology doesn't exist. We had a hearing yesterday on on electrifying the large fleet, large vehicles in the country, and nobody wants to recognize that they weigh 3 to 5 times more and they can haul less things and they can go shorter distances. You want to talk about inflation in consumer goods. If you can haul less potatoes from Grafton to Minneapolis because of the weight of your vehicle, and it takes you twice as long to do it, what's that going to do to the cost of the good? It's going to drive the cost of French fries up. But the producer's not seeing that increase. So we have to have these real conversations, and they don't want to have those real conversations. But at the same time, we have to acknowledge that consumers are demanding this worldwide. And it doesn't matter if you live in Fargo or Bismarck or New York City or Berlin. Our companies, in order to compete on the world stage, 1, cannot get regulated out of business, but 2, are going to have to adapt to consumer demand. And that's the part of this conversation we want to be a part of. Not more regulation, not more picking winners and losers, but allowing for technology neutral R&D, dealing with these issues and making sure that people realize how we do things in the heartland is not how you think we do them when you live in New York City.
And really, I think there's an element here of choice. Right? I want wind to be a choice when it makes sense. I want solar to be a choice when it makes sense. I mean, if we're going to talk about how are we going to power long haul trucks, which are crucially important to our economy, well, maybe there should be a menu. I mean, maybe electricity works for a delivery vehicle in a community. I don't know. Maybe natural gas works for a truck that's got to go across 7 states. I don't know. I don't necessarily want to be the one. I think what we've got to stop doing from a political perspective is deciding for these industries what works best. I think that we've got to just make sure that we have a menu of options. Maybe it's diesel, maybe it's natural gas, maybe it's electricity, maybe it's hydrogen. I don't know. But let's make sure we have all of the opportunities available so that our market can function, because that's how it marches, is through choice. That's how it brings us prosperity. That's how it gets really efficient, and that's how it works out well for everybody.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think what we've done out here over the course of 25, 30 years is we've subsidized particular industries to the point now where we have to subsidize the resilient and reliable ones in order to allow them to compete when a particular energy source potentially can sell electrons onto the grid for less than it costs us to produce. Exactly. That's not the free market. That's a regulatory preference.
Right.
I think that I brought this up in the hearing yesterday, and I think this is really important because we've had 13 hearings on the Clean Futures Act. You know what's not in the Clean Futures Act? Litigation reform. And without litigation reform, we all want to talk about regulatory and permitting, but we've heard, and this is true, particularly if you take the Democratic's version of what comes next, you need 3 times the high voltage transmission lines in this country than you have right now. Well, you go try and get a high voltage line through any community anywhere, because infrastructure, like you said, infrastructure is boring. Utilitarian infrastructure coming through your community is never popular. It decreases property values. It does all of these different issues. But if you're not going to talk about litigation reform, I don't know how you're going to move any of these projects moving forward, because the pipeline industry has taught the environmental left how to challenge every single one of these projects. And if you're a prairie chicken or a sage grouse, you don't particularly care what's bifurcating your habitat. You just care that your habitat's being bifurcated. And these issues are all coming home now on all of these issues. And I think my friends on the environmental left are going to look back at Keystone XL, DAPL, Enbridge and go, wow, we didn't have a lot of foresight here, because we can't get a transmission line to bring hydropower from Canada to the East Coast.
Well, yeah, that's exactly right. And listen, one lawsuit after another. You want to talk about litigation reform? Let's talk about what that really is. This is large groups with enormous pools of money donated for political reasons, that are essentially used to file one suit after another, not to raise, I think, what we would consider to be good faith legal objections, which we obviously
they don't even
all
want
want
to win necessarily.
They don't even want to win. They just want to protract the problem. They don't care if they win or not. They'll just, as soon as they lose, they'll just file the next suit.
That's why I'm so adamant about regulation and regulatory reform, because if you have to deal with the BIA, the BLM, Forest Service, Corps of Engineers, Interior, EPA, every single piece of paper you file with a federal government agency, they don't care if it's right or it's wrong. All they're looking for is if it's different from something you filed somewhere else. That's it. And it could be how the question is asked, right? It could, because that difference is where litigation comes in. And so you can do all the reform you want. You can do all the regulatory reform. You can do all the collaboration with the states you want. But if you don't tighten up the amount of paperwork people have to put into the record on large infrastructure projects, you never get around the litigation reform.
How do we? Well, let's switch gears here, and because I know we're coming up on the end of the time I have with you. Let's talk about Big Tech Task Force. That's a hugely important issue. I know you're particularly interested in the privacy aspects of it. I am also interested in the privacy aspects. Are such a weird thing because so much of the privacy we've given up, we've done so voluntarily in exchange for a lot of the offerings that companies like Google and Facebook and Twitter have made available to us. But also the impact on speech. I'm thinking of the debate that we've had over where the coronavirus originated, where there was a group of people early on who were saying, gosh, maybe it originated in the coronavirus research facility that existed in the province in China where the coronavirus began. Like, that's maybe not I think jumping to the conclusion that it was absolutely from there is probably wrong, but I think that's absolutely a valid line of inquiry. And yet people who raised that question, serious-minded people, were being banned by Facebook and banned by Twitter for just asking the question or making factual arguments that's a possibility. I'm worried about any company or any small group of companies having that much influence over our ability to have public discourse. So is that, what is this task force doing? Are we addressing those issues with this?
I'll tell you how much I'm worried about it. I had a choice of being on the Energy and Environment Task Force and the Big Tech Task Force, and I chose Big Tech. That, if you want to know how I feel about this, that shit, just you knowing me should give you an idea how dangerous I think this is. And I think, first of all, we're going to have the haters out there say, you don't have a First Amendment right, it's a private company. Fine. That doesn't mean censorship doesn't exist. Censorship and First Amendment rights are not the same thing. And these companies are censoring people. But more importantly, and I think this is what you're getting at, or at least what I'm getting at, if 50% of the people hate a Honda Accord and think of a Honda Accord as a bad product, Honda has problems. That's just the truth. If 50% of this country thinks big tech is treating them unfairly, they have no consequences to that. That means their market power exists in a realm that doesn't allow for consumer choice. And if you don't have consumer choice, then you get into the censorship, then you get into all of the other draconian things that big tech is allowed to do, catch and kill, acquiring other companies to kill it, to stifle competition. So there's the privacy aspect to this. There's a data aspect to this. There's a government privacy aspect to this, geofence warrants, facial recognition. I think those are actually the simplest issues to solve because there is actually a Fourth Amendment issue, and we can deal with that. And if we don't, I think the courts will. But we have to figure out both through FTC, DOJ, and the regulatory side of the antitrust, and also through the legislative side of creating competition or creating more competition in the marketplace. And that's before we get into advertising on radios and advertising on newspapers and how these platforms deliver and control information. So it's not just I'm not just concerned about the privacy thing. I'm concerned about the fact, with the exception of the East Indian Trading Company, I think Facebook, Google, and Amazon are the three most powerful companies in the history of the world. And if we aren't going to, we regulate our local cable company more than we regulate the big tech. And if anybody thinks that makes any sense in the 21st century, they're not paying attention.
What about people who say, oh, sure, you're all laissez-faire when it comes to pipelines and coal plants and everything, but now with big tech, suddenly you want to regulate? I don't believe that. And I think, I think there's a proper role of government. I think there's a proper role of government in regulating pipelines. It should be an exacting process. But people who make that argument, like, why are you Republicans in favor of regulation all of a sudden?
Well, first of all, I did regulate pipelines. I served on the Natural Resources Committee in North Dakota in the middle of the oil boom, and we had to rewrite our entire pipeline. I'm for reasonable regulation. My concern on the big tech is the politics outrun the policy, and in our quest to win political gain on both sides, by the way, both Democrats and Republicans have problem with big tech. It's just not the same ones. I worry about what happened with GDPR in Europe happens here. And what I mean by that, and I think this is borne true over history, in our quest to regulate big companies, when have we not hurt small companies worse? Like healthcare, banking, oil and gas, you pick your industry, and when the federal government does this, so we have to do it, we have to move forward. But my answer to it is they control the information. That is the truth. And you notice I haven't said Twitter. Twitter's not actually a very big company. Twitter's for sport, right? But when you're talking Facebook, Google, and Amazon, they control information flow. And that's what makes them different. And that's what makes them objectively dangerous should they choose to pick and win. Listen, I have a tremendous amount of respect for anybody who grew these things out of a dorm room or a garage when nobody in the world believed in it. And they did this. But one person should not have that much control over the flow of information. And the reality is when you market yourself as essential to the 21st century business economy, education economy, political economy, then you become part of that conversation. And one person shouldn't decide what is allowed to be shown on or not. How the origins of this coronavirus conversation go over the next 18 months and what happened at the beginning of this with scientists, with the media, and with big tech, I think if people are capable of embarrassment anymore in the 21st century, there's going to be a lot of people really embarrassed.
Do you last question, how much of because I perceive the roots of the problem with big tech, I don't really think Facebook wanted to become the speech police. I think that was something that they were kind of drug into because
all of them, Mark Zuckerberg has been the most adamant about the best cure for speech is more speech. I think when you get into the coronavirus part of it, that completely went off the rails. I think you're right. But I think the genesis of this, the origins of this had its roots in us, the general public, not you and I maybe specifically, but reacting and saying, oh, somebody's saying something I don't like, so Facebook do something about it. And then that just started to grow because, I mean, listen, there's jerks on Facebook who are writing just outrageous, ugly, untrue things. That's absolutely the truth. But it seems go to comment 30 on either any of my posts or any of your posts. Just go to comment 30 right now and you'll find one of them.
I don't read a lot of the Facebook. I mean, listen, I run a blog with an open comment section for 18 years on the internet. I know all about trolls and everything else. And I'll tell you, the one thing I've always been reluctant to do is appoint myself as the policeman, because you're never going to make anybody happy. And it just becomes, I think the original mistake, I think if we want to get to what you and I are talking about, we may just have to tolerate that there's people who are going to write horrible, awful things on Facebook, and we just need to use the personal tools, block and ignore and hide and all those other tools they make available to us to censor them for ourselves. And just leave Facebook out of it. I mean, at some point, I kind of think that if we want this to work, Facebook, Google, Twitter, they're just going to have to be a common carrier for speech and recognize that some of that speech is going to be horrible.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm willing to. Well, I agree with you. I mean, I just generally agree with you. I obviously don't have the luxury of blocking or hiding people. I wouldn't do that on an official site, but on my personal page, I do it, and I'll continue to do it, and all of those things. But I think I agree with that. I think we also. I mean, if we want to continue to lead in this area and continue to move forward, we have to remove barriers to entry in this space. They're not a lot. We're lucky. We have Bushel and Fargo, which is kind of a unicorn in the tech space over the last 6-7 years, and they've done a great job. By the way, they will tell you without Google, they probably aren't where they are right now. So I don't want to. Companies do really good things.
I use a ton of Google products. I think overall, they're a wonderful company. It's just we have some problems in some very specific areas.
I think as a society, we're going to have to determine how much of our data we want people to have. And that's a longer, bigger conversation. And it gets worse even when you're starting talking to younger generations who never grew up being fairly anonymous. Like you could hide from your friends when I was in college because you didn't have a cell phone.
Although the funny thing was we got a telephone book delivered on our porch the other day, and my daughters were looking at it like, what is this? And I said, what's the phone book? And they said they just printed everybody's name in a book with their phone number and address and handed it out to everybody. I'm like, yeah, it's a thing we used to do.
But I also I think it's important to recognize this, and then I'm going to have to go. But that. Remember, every time these companies tell you they're doing something to protect their privacy, every single time, it also has the benefit of increasing their market share. And that's both of those things can be true, but they're not both good things. And so so we have to talk about ads. We have to talk about how they make their money, and we have to look at ways to increase transparency and increase competition. We just have to.
Kelly, thanks for your time.
Thanks, Rob.